All right, so get ready, because today we are doing a deep dive into a topic that might just surprise you.
Oh, intriguing. Let's hear it.
The history of Valentine's Day.
Valentine's Day, that's all hearts and flowers. What's surprising about that?
Well, one of our listeners reached out and sent us this really fascinating article.
Okay.
And it explores where this seemingly innocent holiday came from. And let me tell you, things aren't always what they seem.
Ooh, I do love a good mystery. What did you uncover?
Well, you know how I'm always saying that our modern celebrations are often like a blend of ancient traditions?
Right. We've talked about that before.
Yeah. Well, this one, let's just say it has some pretty unexpected origins.
I'm all ears.
Okay, so are you ready for this?
Hit me with it.
This article claims that Valentine's Day, with all its hearts and flowers and chocolates and all that, could actually be traced back to two ancient Roman festivals.
Which ones?
Lupercalia and the feast day of Juno Februata.
That's quite a contrast, isn't it?
It really is.
You think about it, Valentine's Day, all about love and romance and, roses and chocolate and all that. And then these Roman festivals, we're talking animal sacrifices and ritualistic floggings.
Yeah, whoa. It's pretty intense.
A little bit, yeah.
So tell me more about that. Like how
did they all get tied together?
Yeah.
Well, let's start with Lupercalia. This one was celebrated on February 15th.
Okay.
Dedicated to Lupercus. He was the Roman god of a whole bunch of things.
Like what?
Fertility, shepherding, protection.
Okay.
Even hunting wolves.
Wolves? Wait a minute. What do wolves have to do with love and romance?
Well, the Romans, they were terrified of wolf packs, right?
Yeah, I can imagine.
And attack their livestock and even people.
Right.
They believed that Lupercus would protect them. So part of Lupercalia was this whole purification ritual.
Okay.
Performed by these priests called the Luperci in the Lupercal cave, which, by the way, is believed to be the very same cave where Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome, were supposedly raised by a she-wolf.
No way. Talk about layers of history.
I know, right? Layers upon layers.
Wow. Okay. So how did they actually celebrate Lupercalia?
Okay. Picture this. All right. You've got these Luperci, and they're wearing only loincloths made from the skins of sacrificed goats, and they're covered in blood.
Ooh.
They would run through the streets of Rome, striking women with thongs also made from goat skin.
Ouch. That doesn't sound very romantic.
No, not exactly. But the Romans, they believed that this would purify the women and ensure their fertility.
Talk about a far cry from exchanging boxes of chocolates.
You said it.
Yeah.
It really shows you how much our understanding of love and celebration has evolved over the years.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, imagine trying to explain to someone today that hitting them with a goatskin thong is a sign of affection.
Right.
Cultural norms have definitely changed.
For sure. But hey, speaking of which, February wasn't just about Lupercus.
Oh.
The 14th was dedicated to another Roman deity.
Okay.
Juno Februata.
Yeah. Juno Februata. Okay.
Goddess of love and marriage.
All right. Now, this sounds a bit more like Valentine's Day.
Well, sort of. Her feast day, they had this custom, they called it the billet lottery.
The billet lottery? What is that?
So picture this. You've got all these young girls, and their names are written on slips of paper, put into a container, and then young men would each draw a name, and whoever they got, that was their couple for the year.
So basically, an ancient Roman version of a dating app.
Kind of, yeah. Like a really, really old school Tinder.
Wow. Okay. So did these couples, did they stay together after the year was over?
Not always, no. But the custom was practiced for centuries in the Roman Empire.
Wow.
And remember those, how do we put it before? Erotic games that were part of Lupercalia.
Right.
Well, they were a big part of Juno Februata's festivities, too.
Oh, okay.
And the Romans, they believed that Juno Februata herself, she influenced this fever of love.
I see.
Which in a way kind of connects to the strong emotions that Valentine's Day still evokes today, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's pretty wild to think about how something we consider so romantic might have its roots in rituals that, we'd probably find pretty strange today.
Totally. And you want to know the best part?
What's that?
Here comes the early Christian church. They weren't exactly thrilled about these, shall we say, enthusiastic, pagan festivals.
Yeah, I can imagine.
They saw them as, well, a bit too much for their liking, So they tried to give these festivals a bit of a makeover.
A makeover, like a religious rebrand.
Exactly. In AD 494, Pope Gelasius, she decided to rename the festival of Juno Februata as the Feast of the Purification of the Virgin Mary. Oh, wow. He even tried to move the date around, first to February 2nd, then back to the 14th. But as we see with many traditions,
hard to shake them off.
Yeah.
They stick around.
So it seems like some dates just have this cultural significance,
Totally. But what about Lupercalia?
Yeah, what do they do with that one? Well, that was a tougher one to handle. After Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, the church leaders, they really wanted to get rid of the pagan festivals, right?
I can imagine, yeah.
They saw Lupercalia as one of the worst offenders, but the Roman citizens, they loved their Lupercalia,
Right.
They weren't about to give it up that easily.
So what happened? Did they manage to get rid of it?
Well, not entirely. It took until AD 496, but Pope Gelasius, he eventually renamed it.
Okay.
Shifted the date to, you guessed it, February 14th and called it...
Wait for it.
St. Valentine's Day.
So they just slapped a new name on this ancient tradition and hoped no one would notice.
Very much.
Wow. That's pretty clever.
Right.
But can you really change the meaning of something that deeply ingrained just by giving it a new name?
It does make you wonder, doesn't it?
It really does.
And then there's the question of St. Valentine himself. According to the Catholic Encyclopedia, there could be at least 3 different St. Valentines. Yeah, all martyrs associated with February 14th, a priest from Rome, a bishop, and another one who was martyred in Africa.
Wow.
And their stories have become so intertwined, it's almost impossible to tell them apart.
So who was the real St. Valentine, and what does the name even mean?
Well, Valentine comes from the Latin Valentinus, which comes from valens. And that means strong, powerful, mighty.
Strong, powerful, mighty. Yeah.
And interestingly enough, the Bible describes a man with a similar title, Nimrod.
Wait, Nimrod, the mighty hunter from the Bible. Are you suggesting there might be a connection between him and Valentine's Day?
It's a possibility worth exploring, wouldn't you say? Remember, Lupercalia was all about honoring Lupercus, the Roman god of hunting.
Right.
And the Greeks, who heavily influenced the Romans, they knew Lupercus as Pan, their god of light. And the Phoenicians, they also had a similar god, Baal, the sun god.
Okay, so we've got all these powerful, mighty figures, St. Valentine, Nimrod, Lupercus, Pan, Baal. But what about the heart symbol? Where does that fit into all of this?
Oh, this is where things get even more intriguing. You see, the title Baal appears throughout the Bible as a god worshipped by pagans. And get this, in ancient Chaldean, the language of the Babylonians, Baal meant heart.
No way. So the Valentine heart symbol, it could have come from the ancient Chaldean word for heart, which was also linked to the name of a pagan god.
It's a pretty compelling connection, isn't it?
That's fascinating.
And then there's Cupid. He's always depicted as this, mischievous little archer making people fall head over heels in love.
Right.
But in mythology, he was known for using his arrows not to spread kindness, but to drive people mad with passion and then just laugh at the results.
Oh, wow. That's a bit darker than the image of Cupid we have today. So are you saying that many of the gods from these different ancient cultures were actually modeled after Nimrod?
It's a possibility that the source explores in detail, and it raises some really interesting questions about how these ancient figures and their stories might be connected to Valentine's Day.
Definitely got my attention. This is a lot more complex than I ever imagined.
It always is, isn't it?
It is.
But, you might be thinking, what does all this ancient history have to do with us today?
Right.
Like, why should we even care about what happened thousands of years ago?
Yeah, good question.
Well, that's a great question, and it's one that the source itself tackles head on.
Okay.
You see, it takes a very strong stance against celebrating Valentine's Day and argues that its pagan roots make it incompatible with certain religious beliefs.
Okay, now things are getting really interesting. Tell me more.
Yeah, it's easy to think of these ancient practices as like relics of the past, right?
Right.
But this source, it argues that understanding the origins of traditions like Valentine's Day is actually pretty important.
I can see that, yeah.
Especially for people of faith.
Okay. I can see how delving into the historical context can kind of give us a fresh perspective.
Totally.
So what specifically does the source say about Valentine's Day and faith?
Well, it argues that paganism at its core It's about worshiping something other than the one true God.
Yeah.
It could be nature, idols, even other human beings.
Right.
And the source really emphasizes that this kind of worship, it's condemned in the Bible.
So the source is suggesting that by celebrating a holiday with roots in these pagan festivals, we're somehow going against those teachings, even if we don't realize it.
That's the argument, yeah.
Okay.
And to illustrate this point, the source uses some pretty vivid examples from the Bible.
Okay.
Focusing on the Israelites and how they were punished for, turning away from God and embracing pagan gods and practices.
Yeah, I remember learning about that. It didn't end well for them.
No, it didn't. The source points out that even though the Israelites had experienced these incredible miracles, like firsthand,
Right.
they still strayed from their faith and faced some pretty severe consequences as a result.
Wow.
And it uses this as a warning,
Yeah.
about the dangers of straying from God's commands.
That's a pretty serious interpretation.
It is.
The source also mentioned something about sacrificing children, right?
Yes.
That's a bit disturbing. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
This is where the argument gets particularly challenging, I'd say.
Okay.
The source connects the sexual immorality often associated with pagan practices to the act of child sacrifice.
Yeah.
It specifically mentions the Canaanite god Molech,
Right.
to whom children were offered as burnt offerings.
That's horrifying.
Yeah, it's a very disturbing part of history.
But surely they're not saying that that's happening today, are they?
No. The source acknowledges that literal child sacrifice, it's not a common practice in modern society, thankfully.
Right.
However, it makes a pretty bold claim that parents today are sacrificing their children's innocence in a different way.
Okay, not sure I follow.
Yeah.
How is giving a Valentine's Day card to a classmate sacrificing their innocence?
Well, the source argues that by pushing children to engage in romantic gestures and relationships at such a young age, we're essentially robbing them of their childhood and exposing them to these adult concepts before they're ready.
I see what you mean. It's like we're fast-tracking them into this world of romance and relationships before they've even had a chance to just be kids.
Precisely. And the source connects this back to the more permissive attitudes towards sexuality that were often found in pagan cultures.
Right.
It argues that by celebrating Valentine's Day, even in these seemingly innocent ways, we're contributing to a culture of, early sexualization.
That's a thought-provoking perspective.
Yeah.
It makes you think about the messages we might be sending, even unintentionally.
It does, yeah. It really makes you pause and think.
It does.
But if we take this argument seriously, what are the implications? Does that mean everyone who celebrates Valentine's Day is doomed? Well, the source doesn't really offer, a definitive answer there.
Okay.
It kind of leaves us with more questions than answers, encouraging us to reflect on our own beliefs and values and really think about whether participating in certain traditions aligns with our personal convictions.
I have to admit, I'm starting to feel a bit conflicted about Valentine's Day myself.
Really?
Yeah, I enjoy the romantic aspect of it.
Sure.
But after learning about these ancient origins, it's hard to ignore the potential conflicts.
Yeah, I get it. It's definitely a lot to process.
It is.
I think perhaps that's the point of this whole thing, This deep dive. It isn't necessarily about condemning anyone for celebrating Valentine's Day.
Right.
It's more about encouraging, critical thinking and self-reflection. It's challenging us to consider how our traditions, even those that seem lighthearted, might be shaping our values and behaviors.
It's a good reminder that even something as simple as a holiday can have a really complex history and a deeper meaning that we might realize at first glance.
Absolutely. And it raises an important question.
Which is?
If we strip away the romance, the commercialism, the hearts and flowers, what does Valentine's Day really represent to us?
That's a great question. Is it a celebration of love, a reminder of our past, a commercial trap, or something else entirely?
The answer, my friend, is for each of us to figure out.
I love that. But the source doesn't stop there.
No.
It goes on to introduce this idea of a great deception that's at work in the world.
A great deception.
And it ties us back to Valentine's Day and something it calls the god of this world.
Okay, now that sounds intense. Are we heading into conspiracy theory territory now?
Not quite.
Okay.
But the source does present a worldview that some listeners might find unconventional. I'll just say that.
All right, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So it's rooted in a particular interpretation of Scripture.
Yeah.
Specifically, 2 Corinthians 4.4.
Okay, 2 Corinthians 4.4, I'm familiar.
Which talks about the God of this world who has blinded the minds of those who don't believe.
So it's suggesting there's like this force out there opposed to God that's actively trying to deceive people.
That's the basic idea, yeah. And the source then connects this concept of deception to Valentine's Day, claiming that it's one of the tools that this God of this world uses to mislead people.
That's a pretty big claim. How does Valentine's Day fit into this whole, like, scheme of deception?
Well, the source points to the holiday's emphasis on romantic love and physical intimacy.
Okay.
It argues that this focus on sensual pleasure and desire, it distracts from what it sees as truly important,
Which is?
a relationship with God and spiritual fulfillment.
So it's not saying that love and relationships are bad in themselves.
Right.
But that Valentine's Day, by focusing on the more surface level aspects of romance, might be leading people away from a deeper, more spiritual path.
Exactly.
I see. And it goes on to suggest that this focus on physical desires and gratification, it's part of this larger pattern of, you know, societal decay and moral decline.
Okay, yeah. I can see how someone might make that connection.
Right.
Okay. But a lot of people just see Valentine's Day as a harmless celebration of love. How does the source kind of reconcile that view with its own interpretation?
It doesn't really engage with those alternative viewpoints.
Right.
It presents a very specific interpretation based on its own understanding of Scripture.
But is the source suggesting that we should completely reject love and relationships? That seems a bit extreme.
No, it doesn't go that far. It actually acknowledges that love is a powerful force.
Okay.
It even quotes the Bible, saying that God is love.
Right.
But it emphasizes that true love, it should be rooted in godliness and purity, not in these like fleeting passions or selfish desires.
So it's more about prioritizing spiritual growth and obedience to God over romantic love.
That seems to be the main point, yeah.
Okay. So it's not saying that love is bad,
No, not necessarily.
but just that Valentine's Day might be emphasizing the wrong kind of love.
Exactly. The source suggests that true love, it should be rooted in God,
Okay.
focused on purity and selflessness, not just on those romantic feelings and physical desires.
I can see how someone might see it that way.
And the source uses some pretty strong language to describe the dangers of giving in to temptations.
Like what?
It quotes Galatians 5.19221,
Okay.
which lists adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness as works of the flesh that will prevent people from inheriting the kingdom of God.
Wow, those are some heavy words.
They are.
It sounds like the source is drawing a very clear line between what it considers right and wrong behavior.
Yeah, it definitely presents a strong moral framework.
It does. But what does all this mean for us, the listeners? Are we supposed to completely rethink our views on Valentine's Day?
Well, I think the key takeaway isn't necessarily to agree or disagree with everything the source says.
Okay.
It's more about using it as a starting point for self-reflection, you know?
Right.
This deep dive, it's introduced us to some pretty challenging ideas about the origins and meaning of Valentine's Day.
It really has.
It's up to each of us to decide how we want to integrate this new knowledge into our own lives.
It's amazing how a seemingly simple holiday can raise so many questions about history, culture, and faith. Okay.
And it really just encourages readers to consider whether celebrating Valentine's Day aligns with their own faith and values.
So it's more about prompting that self-reflection than condemning anyone outright.
That seems to be the main goal, yeah. The source, it wants readers to think critically about the origins and meaning of Valentine's Day and, make their own informed decisions.
It's fascinating how one holiday can spark such a wide range of interpretations and debates.
It really is. And it's a good reminder that we all bring our own perspectives and beliefs to the table, when we think about these traditions and holidays. What might seem harmless to one person could be seen as problematic by another.
That's a really important point. So if we step back from this particular source's interpretation, what are some other ways that people might view Valentine's Day?
Well, some might see it as a purely secular holiday,
Right.
just a chance to celebrate love and connection without any religious connotations.
Right.
Others might focus on its historical roots, acknowledging its pagan origins, but appreciating how it's evolved over time.
And some might just enjoy the excuse to eat chocolate and give gifts.
Exactly. There's no single right way to view Valentine's Day, It's a holiday that can hold different meanings for different people.
That's true. This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. I never realized how much history and symbolism was packed into this one holiday.
It's amazing what you can uncover when you start, digging beneath the surface of something we often take for granted. It really is. It highlights the importance of always being willing to question our assumptions and, dig deeper into the meaning behind the things we do.
Well said.
Whether you choose to celebrate Valentine's Day or not, understanding its complex history and the variety of interpretations surrounding it, it can really enrich your understanding of culture and faith, and even your own personal values.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into this surprisingly complex world of Valentine's Day, what's one final thought-provoking question you'd like to leave our listeners with?
If we set aside the romance, the commercialism, the ancient roots, and the potentially problematic aspects, what does Valentine's Day represent to you? Is it a celebration of love, a reminder of our past, a commercial trap, or something else entirely? The answer, my friend, is yours to discover.
I love that. It's a great reminder that we each have the power to define what this holiday means for us.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those brains buzzing.